Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Around the nation right here, Jeff Waldorf, Friday afternoon. Got a lot of breaking news, got a lot of big stories for you, including the 25th Amendment. And Rod Rosenstein may have secret tapes. Oh, you're not going to want to miss that story. In fact, we're going to do that right immediately. We also have information where that a White House lawyer, former White House lawyer, had been funneling money to Paul Manafort. We have Ted Cruz, his race. We have Kavanaugh, of course, Republicans talking about Kavanaugh. We also have Republicans and their tax cuts. They're in a little bit of a panic mode over some recent polls when it comes to tax cuts. We have Very Stable Genius. I think you'll like that story. That's a little bit of fun. And then, of course, we have a disastrous story about mental health care. What happened to two women in North Carolina, no, I believe it was South Carolina, North Carolina, who lost their lives as a result of police incompetence. So it's a very sad story. We're going to talk about that as well, because I think that there's an important point about police training in that story. So we'll do that today. Anyway, please, if you haven't already, share the stream. Sharing is caring. That helps out. Also, if you want to support the show, there's a couple ways you can do that. Patreon.com/DYTNation, or you can send super chats, or either or both. Either way, it helps support the show. Okay, anyway, like I said, we have a lot of news to go to, so let's start out with Rosenstein. Okay, now, New York Times with a bombshell report. So this is breaking earlier today. It turns out that there could be secret tapes, more secret tapes of Donald Trump. This time, they may have been taken by Rod Rosenstein. Now, Rod Rosenstein, of course, is the Deputy Attorney General. Now, according to this report, which is already starting controversy and getting some strong condemnations from the White House, suggested that last year, Rosenstein was going to secretly record President Trump to expose the chaos consuming the administration. And he had also discussed with other cabinet members the idea of invoking the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office for being mentally unfit. Now, according to the Times, Mr. Rosenstein made these suggestions in the spring of 2017 when Mr. Trump's firing of James Comey as FBI plunged the White House into turmoil. Over the ensuing days, the president divulged classified information to Russians in the Oval Office, and revelations emerged that Mr. Trump had asked Mr. Comey to pledge loyalty and end an investigation into a senior aide. Now, to show you the situation that Rosenstein was basically thrust into, he was, all this happened, that entire whirlwind of news that would have had a Democratic president been involved in the same thing, would have immediately started impeachment proceedings. All that in the space of the first 2 weeks. Rosenstein gets in there, he's like, holy shit balls. What have I like landed into? What kind of whirlwind shitstorm, poop NATO have I ended up in? What the hell is going on? Now, he, of course, had begun overseeing the Russia investigation and played a key role in the president's dismissal of Mr. Comey by writing a memo critical of his handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Now, look, that Trump asked him, hey, write this email. I don't care, like, just, you know, go after Comey for being too hard on Hillary. Yeah, okay, sure, I can do that. Now, later on, he began to suspect, wait a minute, that memo that you used to basically blame firing Comey on, uh-oh, I think I made a mistake writing it. He grew concerned. First, he was caught off guard when Mr. Trump used that memo in the firing. And according to people who spoke with Mr. Rosenstein at the time, he started to get angry at Mr. Trump. And he grew concerned that his reputation had suffered harm and wondered whether Mr. Trump had motives beyond Mr. Comey's treatment of Mrs. Clinton for ousting him. You know that memo? Nobody believed that memo anyway. But Trump out there was like, oh no, see, I'm so mad at James Comey for the way he did Hillary dirty. By the way, crooked Hillary, lock her up, lock her up. No one believed that. That was the most bullshit excuse, right? He wanted us to then, after, of course, people at his rallies, crooked Hillary, lock her up, lock her up. And the crowds, they still chant that at Trump rallies, lock her up, lock her up. Wants us to believe, or at least at the time wanted us to believe, that he was trying to protect Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump thinks we're as stupid as he actually is. Jesus. Now, Mr. Rosenstein then made remarks about secretly recording Mr. Trump and about the 25th Amendment in meetings and conversations with other Justice Department and FBI officials. So it was after all of that went down, and he's like, shit, man, I think I was used. I think this guy's an idiot. Oh, no. Maybe we should think about getting rid of him. Now, several people described the episodes, insisting on anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. Now, the people that were briefed on the events themselves or in memos written by FBI officials include Andrew McCabe, then acting bureau director, that documented Mr. Rosenstein's actions and comments. Now, Rosenstein also told Mr. McCabe that he might be able to persuade Attorney General Jeff Sessions and John Kelly, then the Secretary of Homeland Security and now the White House Chief of Staff, to mount an effort to invoke the 25th Amendment. Now, here's the thing. He publicly, of course, denies the report. Oh, no, that New York Times completely off base, maybe even fake news. But according to others who described his comments, Mr. Rosenstein not only confirmed that he was serious about the idea, but also followed up by suggesting that other FBI officials who were interviewing to be the Bureau's director could also secretly record Mr. Trump. So there's a couple of things. Number one, this could be absolutely true. Or, and I just had this thought, it could be a setup. Right now, Donald Trump is feverishly looking for the person that wrote the New York Times op-ed, right? What if they're trying to pin this on Rosenstein and say, oh, it must have been Rosenstein that wrote it. And then whoever actually might have wrote it might get away because they would stop looking. Oh, that's a fascinating theory. We've got conspiracies inside of conspiracies. But anyway, now if you're to believe the New York Times story, then it is possible that Rosenstein may have tapes of the president. Speaking of tapes, Mr. Rosenstein apparently had raised the idea of wearing a recording device, or wire, as he put it, to secretly tape the president when he visited the White House during Trump's search for a new FBI director. One participant asked whether Mr. Rosenstein was serious, and he replied animatedly that he was. If not him, then maybe Mr. McCabe or other FBI officials interviewing with Mr. Trump for the job could perhaps wear a wire or otherwise record the president, Mr. Rosenstein offered. White House officials never checked his phone when he arrived for meetings there, Mr. Rosenstein added, implying that it would be easy to secretly record Mr. Trump. So hold on here. So first it's Omarosa. Then he was recorded by, and this was Michael Cohen, his former lawyer, also with having recordings of President Trump. And now it could be Rod Rosenstein that also may have recordings of Donald Trump. Who, at this point, who hasn't recorded President Dum Dum? Because that's what this is, right? You have everybody recording the dumbest president in history. This is unprecedented. This is amazing. Wow. Now, look, that doesn't mean that there are actually tapes. In fact, the New York Times writes, in the end, the idea went nowhere, the official said, but they called Mr. Rosenstein's comments an example of how erratically he was behaving while he was taking part in the interviews for a replacement for FBI director. Now, the episode is the first known instance of a named senior administration official weighing the 25th Amendment. And this, of course, ties in to that New York Times op-ed from the unnamed senior administration official who basically brought that up. We talked about the 25th Amendment. We decided we weren't going to do it. Okay, well, there you go. They decided they weren't going to do it. Now, I have a couple of theories on that, but this is another piece of proof that the op-ed is basically describing what's really going on in the White House. They know he's dumb. They know he's dangerous. Everything we've said about Donald Trump being mentally unfit for office, I think is true. He's a deeply unstable person. And everybody knows it. So then why don't they get rid of him? Why don't they use the 25th Amendment? Well, it's a couple of reasons. Either they think they've got a handle on him, and they know how to steer him towards things that they don't want him to do and towards things that they want him to do, or they know that the Trump base is so insane that they might tear the country apart if Trump is removed. Or maybe they have some sort of plan to get him to step down. I don't know. But I think this is more evidence that Donald Trump is mentally unfit for office, has to go, and everybody knows it. Okay. I'm going to take a quick break here. We'll come back. We got more stories, so don't worry. Stay right here, Round the Nation. Everybody, welcome back to the show. Around the Nation right here. Jeff Waldorf here with you. Let's get into more stories. How's that for smooth? Hashtag not very. Okay. So Wall Street Journal with a new report about John Dowd. Turns out Dowd tried to use the White House Legal Defense Fund to go pay legal fees for both Paul Manafort and Rick Gates. Now, Rick Gates, of course, had turned and started working with the Mueller investigation. And then Paul Manafort also just turned to work with the Mueller investigation, looking into, of course, to Trump Russia. Now, John Dowd is the former lawyer, former White House attorney. So it kind of makes sense that he would be using that because it was somewhat related into the investigation into Trump Russia. Now, according to the Journal, Dowd told associates of the president that he wanted to direct money from the Legal Defense Fund set up for the White House officials and campaign aides and lawyers for Manafort and Gates. However, the idea was rejected by some White House advisors on the grounds that Gates and Manafort were being prosecuted for crimes they committed before coming into Trump's orbit. Now, that's also very interesting. Hey, you can't actually use that because, I mean, that's only for people connected with Trump during the campaign that have actually did crimes during the campaign. It's interesting that Dowd was like, yeah, but I want to use White House legal funds anyway to protect these guys. Now, that's kind of fascinating. Now, that legal defense fund is only supposed to pay for defendants who have allegedly committed crimes while working for the president. So, undeterred, Dowd decided to try to get donations from Trump associates and help fund the legal defense effort with $25,000 of his own money. It turns out that he never wound up putting his own money to help pay for their defense. Upon the advice I received, I did not make that contribution. I decided not to. I wonder what information that he got. Upon the advice. Look, here's the thing about Dowd, right? So I actually think Dowd really believed that the president had not done anything when it comes to Trump Russia. I mean, look, there are previous reports where Dowd at first was open, like, okay, look, I want to work with the Mueller investigation. I want to make sure that, because I believe that the president is innocent. I believe that he did not work with Russia. I believe that he is innocent. That said, John Dowd is also the guy that went to Mueller and said, my client is too stupid. Like, he is literally too dumb to go and be like and do this this meeting with Mueller. There was a mock interview with Mueller where he continued to contradict himself, to lie, and to do the things that normally Trump does on a daily basis. And he's like, oh my God, this guy is too dumb. He's going to get himself in trouble. He's going to end up leaving in an orange jumpsuit. So that's John Dowd. And afterwards, he quit. He's like, I can't represent this guy anymore. So it is interesting that while he was there, he didn't believe that Manafort or Gates, and this explains why he tried to use White House money for this, from the White House Legal Defense Fund. It's because he actually believed all these people are innocent. So that's fascinating. Again, it really tells you who John Dowd is, and that there are people out there that literally believe that Donald Trump didn't do anything wrong. At least probably up to this point. Now, I'm not so sure if he still believes that. But it is interesting that he was willing to put some of his own money, at first at least, and White House resources towards the defense of both Manafort and Gates. So, how that plays out, of course, in the broader Mueller investigation, we'll have to see. I don't think John Dowd will be in trouble for anything. But that is one thing, of course, that he was actually worried about, getting in trouble and being set up. So that's why he got out. But anyway, it's going to be interesting to see how this factors in to the Mueller investigation so far. Okay. Anyway, that's just a quick update on that one. All right. Let's go to Ted Cruz. Now, one of the most widely anticipated congressional elections has recently become even more heated. Now, the Cook Political Report updated its rating today for Texas's Senate race, moving it from leans Republican to toss-up amid new polls showing Representative Beto O'Rourke in a tightening race with Senator Ted Cruz. To which I say, here comes Beto! Now, the move follows, of course, a series of polls with Cruz with a very small single-digit lead over his opponent, who has outraised Cruz by millions since the campaign began. Now, I did the poll yesterday. It was a Reuters Ipsos poll, I believe, which showed Beto up by 2 points. There's another poll, survey by left-leaning pollster Public Policy Polling, found Cruz with a 3-point lead. And of course, there are other polls which show, look, there was a Quinnipiac poll the other day that showed Ted Cruz with a 9-point lead. So polls are all over the place. Some are really, really close. Some have Beto ahead. Some have Ted Cruz ahead by just a couple of points. Very, very interesting. Look, this is a very tight race, and it could go either way. I mean, the Cook Political Report is, that's what they look into. They look to see, okay, whether or not these candidates have a chance and what the race is actually shaping up to be. And like we've seen in a lot of races around the country, it's going from a lot of places to go from solidly red to either leans Republican or, in this case, toss-up. Toss-up in Texas, man. Now, the other day, Larry Sabato, director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics, told Reuters that O'Rourke's chances in the Reuters poll are pretty good. There's a possibility it could happen. I'm not saying probable, but it's possible. Nice. Now, moving from, of course, leans Republican, which before it was likely Republican, to lean Republican, now to toss-up. Dude, that shows that Cruz is in real trouble. That's why, of course, Republicans who normally despise Ted Cruz is, look, that's why they're circling the wagons. You got John Cornyn out there raising money. You've got a lot of prominent Republican groups that are trying to raise money for him. You've got Republican super PACs that are trying to pour a lot of money into this race. And he's even crawled to Wall Street in order to try to raise money, and Rebecca Mercer. Now, the Mercer family, of course, did bankroll his presidential campaign in 2016 before flipping over to Donald Trump. Now, here comes Ted Cruz slinking to the Mercer saying, please, please help me. I am not raising money from regular people. No, you know who's raising money from regular people? Beto O'Rourke. Look, he doesn't take corporate PAC money. Ted Cruz takes a lot of corporate PAC money. In fact, those are the only people who actually support him. And so, look, as much as Republicans don't like Ted Cruz, and even Republican voters, he has been a very consistent vote for things like tax cuts and deregulation, etc. So they're like, we've got to protect this seat. We've got to protect this seat at any cost. So expect to see millions and millions and millions of more dollars pour into this race on the side of Ted Cruz. But Beto, he's shown that he can also raise money, and he can do it from small donors. And so That's why this is actually a pretty good toss-up. There is a chance that Ted Cruz could be replaced, and could you imagine if that happened? Could you imagine we were able to knock off Ted Cruz, to send him back home, man? That would be amazing. Amazing. But can't do it by himself. So if you want to get rid of Ted Cruz, help Beto O'Rourke, donate, volunteer. That's the only way we're going to be able to win against that flood of money, which is coming to Texas. Okay. Let's go to Kavanaugh. Congressional Republicans are now worried about Judge Kavanaugh, especially now in light of some of the recent allegations towards the Supreme Court nominee. Now, even though they're worried about this, they are still trying to push ahead with a vote next week. Now, this is according to Axios, who kind of broke this down. What they're saying basically is, according to sources close to Senate Republican leaders, this situation with Kavanaugh is, quote, the ugliest situation imaginable. Well, here we have the Supreme Court justice with very credible allegations of sexual assault, that he, had the door closed and tried to and covered her mouth so that she couldn't scream, and then had a friend hold the door closed. So, yeah, that's a pretty bad situation when you have a Supreme Court justice up there who, again, also is very conservative on things like reproductive rights and has some very, very questionable things that he has said in his past. Like, for example, what stays in schools, or what goes on in school stays in school. So things like that. Not a good situation for him. Not a good situation at all. So this is prompting, of course, a lot of questions. In fact, Dr. Blasey Ford recently said through her lawyers that an FBI investigation of the incident should precede a hearing. And it was one more uncertainty in one long list, according to Axios. Now, this list, starts out with saying, could the call for an FBI probe cause a delay that allows other issues around Kavanaugh to ignite? Could other women come forward with allegations? Maybe, maybe not. Could Senator Jeff Flake use his leverage as payback for past clashes with President Trump? It's possible, but at the same time, I don't think so. And here's why. Jeff Flake, while he speaks out against the president, also is a loyal soldier of the Republican Party. So, for example, while on one side he's like, oh, President Trump, he's so terrible, he is a disaster for the country, for the nation, and then goes and votes with stuff that Donald Trump is in favor of. For example, tax cuts and deregulation. So I don't think that. Will suburban women feel further distance from a party with mostly male leaders who are seen as protecting a man? Look, there are certain polls out there that suggest that the GOP is starting to lose women. Quite a bit. What few women they had left, they are starting to lose over this, especially. So that is possible. In fact, very, very likely. And could this trigger a presidential-like midterm election where issues like Roe v. Wade, the courts, and the rights of women come to the fore? I do hope so, but I also hope we can continue to talk about issues as well. I mean, obviously, super, super important issue is rights of women. Obviously, big, giant issue, right? But it's not just about the courts. which are incredibly important. But there's a lot of issues that we can look at during this midterm election. And of course, there's also the fact that this might be a referendum on President Trump, which is also really important. No matter the motivations, a lot of people need to come out, and a lot of people need to get out and vote and make sure that they get involved. Now, not only that, but of course, here you have Republicans now very, very, very concerned who are looking to hold a final vote on Kavanaugh next week, by the end of next week. In fact, Senator Bob Corker, another Trump opponent who is a loyal soldier for the Republican Party, tweeted, "Republicans extended a hand in good faith. If we don't hear from both sides on Monday, let's vote." No, wait a minute. You didn't extend a hand in good faith. There is no good faith when it comes to Republicans. Look at what happened to Merrick Garland. No, it's Democrats were the one that were like, hey, even though you screwed over Merrick Garland and held him up for a year, we're still going to go to these hearings. And we're still going to hear out Brett Kavanaugh. And most likely, most Republicans are going to vote for Brett Kavanaugh. They're going to vote to confirm him. Why? Because they all pretty much, on at least a lot of these issues, Supreme Court issues especially, they will vote lockstep. And there is a good chance, that even if they get only 49, 50 votes or whatever, 50 votes, then Mike Pence is going to be the tiebreaker. And guess how that's going to go? In fact, McConnell believes he will have the 50 votes needed to confirm Kavanaugh. Now, interesting thing about Mitch McConnell, this is the reason that he didn't want Donald Trump to pick Kavanaugh in the first place. Now, why did Trump pick Kavanaugh when there are plenty of other just as conservative justices out there that maybe didn't have this kind of baggage? Well, it's because of Kavanaugh's stances on whether a president can be indicted while he's in office. And Kavanaugh believes, no, he should not be indicted. A president should not be, while in office, be held accountable for any sort of crimes, putting the president above the law. Donald Trump looked at that and said, oh, that's my guy. That's my guy, because believe me, I'm in trouble. I may be impeached. I may have, the Democrats come after me if they win the midterms. Crap. Let's pick a guy who doesn't think that I could be impeached, that I could be indicted at all. So that's the real reason, right? That's the real reason that he picked Kavanaugh. And of course, Republicans, while they're in solidarity in public, they are currently freaking out in private because this may not go as well. There are some Republicans that might peel off. Suzanne Collins thinking about it. Lisa Murkowski also might be thinking about it. So it is a possibility that they won't get the vote. So we'll see what happens. McConnell is, as I said before, he thinks he thinks he can get the votes. So we'll see what happens. But it's not a good situation that they were put into. And it's all, of course, because Donald Trump wanted his pick so that he didn't get in trouble. Another pick by Donald Trump that only basically serves to benefit himself. Surprise. Okay. All right. So I'm going to take another break here. We'll be back. We got more stories. So stay right here around the nation. Welcome back to the show, Around the Nation, right here, Jeff Waldorf. Got a couple of super chats to read here, or at least one, and a couple of people to thank. Platypi and Moonlit Marigold, thank you. And Guy Tony says, Bet O. That is, all right. Enthusiastic for Beto. All right. Awesome. Okay, let's get into the rest of the show here. Let's go into the Trump tax cuts. Now, a survey commissioned by the Republican National Committee has led the party to basically admit that nobody is believing their lies about the Trump tax cuts that went into effect earlier this year. Now, what were those lies? Well, that it's going to create jobs, and that the tax cuts, well, they're going to help you. They're going to help the middle class. They're not going to help the rich at all. In fact, you had this entire narrative that, oh, no, these tax cuts, they don't help. They're not going to help rich people and corporations. No, these tax cuts are for you. They're for you guys. Well, it turns out that voters disagree. They overwhelmingly say that these tax cuts help the wealthy instead of average Americans. In fact, by a 2-to-1 margin, 61% to 30% of respondents said the law benefits, quote, large corporations and rich Americans over middle-class families, according to the survey, which was completed on September 2nd by the GOP firm Public Opinion Strategies. Now, the result was fueled by self-identified independent voters who said by a 36% margin, point margin, that large corporations and rich people benefit more from the tax law, a result that was even more lopsided among Democrats. Now, what's interesting, by a 38-point margin, Republican voters said that, oh, no, the middle class, they benefit more. But wait a minute. Again, 83% of the benefits of this tax cut went to rich people and corporations. But you have 38% of Republicans who are not living in reality who's like, oh, no. Middle class, they benefited more from these tax cuts. Now, actually, I can explain that. They aren't necessarily living in an alternate reality, but they are living in a reality of where they're incredibly well off. See, there's a study about a few years ago that I remember seeing where people that are actually quite wealthy believe that they are middle class. Now, this is a 2017 survey by Northwestern Mutual. And this is the most recent one I can find, but there were ones a couple of years back. They found that 70% of Americans consider themselves in the middle class. Huh. 70%. That's not true. A 2015 report from the Pew Research Center shows that the middle class had been shrinking over the past 4 decades and now makes up less than half of the United States total population. And I would argue that it's actually a lot lower than that over the last 3 years. So what you have here is that you've got a pretty big chunk of people who are not middle class, who are actually upper class, who are actually fairly wealthy, not like super rich or anything like that, but they're making good money. They don't have to worry about anything. These people believe that they are middle class. These are people that are part of the top 10%. So they're like, what are you talking about? I'm middle class, and these tax cuts are fantastic. You know, I'm getting back, or I'm saving $10,000 a year. Well, that's true for them, but that doesn't make you middle class. Now, of course, there are caveats and things. For example, it matters a lot where you live. So if you're making $200,000 a year in New York or LA, that definitely is middle class. You could argue maybe even some lower middle class in some neighborhoods, right? But if you're in Alabama or Michigan and you make that much, you're definitely higher than middle class. So it all depends on where you live. And of course, how you define the middle class. And that really hasn't been very well defined. And again, going back to some polls, people that are making $500,000 or more are like, no, what are you talking about? I'm middle class. I'm not making $1 million a year. So I must be middle class because I'm certainly not a member of the 1% or the 0.1%. So that kind of explains who those voters actually are. The 38% that think, oh, no, those tax cuts have benefited me greatly and not the rich and corporations, when they actually are kind of considered part of the rich. But anyway, that said, it's pretty clear that a majority of Americans know that they are not benefiting from these tax cuts, which, as I said before, 83% goes to the rich and corporations. However, despite this, and this is the part of the poll that deeply frustrates me, when it comes to approval for the tax law, American voters remain torn, 44% in favor and 45% oppose. No, it should be. I don't know why 70% of the American population doesn't oppose this tax law, or more than 99% of Americans. I mean, look, if it's for the rich and corporations and it benefits mostly them, which of course they're saying, why don't more people hate it? Why? That doesn't seem to make sense to me. I mean, maybe it's because they're starting to believe the Republican narrative on lower taxes for the rich. Saying that, no, this tax law benefits corporations and rich people is different than saying that, well, I don't like it because it benefits corporations and rich people. You see what I mean? I think that Republican narrative that we have been fed over the past 30 years, that, oh, you don't understand, we have to lower taxes on the rich and we have to lower taxes on corporations so that we can create jobs. I think people resonate, or I should say that argument resonates with more people. And so, unfortunately, that's why you have, I think, those numbers. They're buying the bullshit trickle down since Ronald Reagan. But of course, that's not true. There have been, since the Trump tax cuts have been passed, there's been no evidence of accelerated economic growth. Wages haven't go up. Wages are still stagnant. There are not more jobs. We have the same, pretty much the same amount of job growth now than we did under President Obama. And in fact, in some quarters, job growth under Obama surpasses that of quarterly job growth under Donald Trump and under these administration's tax policies. So you can't make an argument that it's really done a whole lot. Especially for jobs, as I said, especially for wages and things like that. But it has done something. It increased the level of stock buybacks by a ton. Stock buybacks, of course, inflates the market and makes companies appear to be worth more than they're actually worth, despite the fact that they don't have actually increased sales. They're not actually doing better. That actually creates a bubble. And you know what happens with bubbles? They burst. Now, on that, back to the poll here. Now, Republicans say, as a result of this poll, that they have lost the messaging battle. The RNC commissioned report said, quote, voters are evenly divided on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but we have lost the messaging battle on the issue. Furthermore, the RNC study says Americans worry that the tax law will lead to cuts in Social Security and Medicare, concluding that most voters believe that the GOP wants to cut back on these programs in order to provide tax breaks for corporations and the wealthy. Now, what have progressives been saying since, I guess, forever? Because you can go back to old comics from the 1920s and 30s that basically say the same thing. We have been saying that, guess what? They want to cut these popular programs so that they can cut taxes for the rich. And it's what they always do, funnel more money to their donors. Now, of course, the Republican study says, oh, no. We think it's because of a fairly disciplined Democratic tack against the recent tax cuts. No. Americans actually know that it's the reality. You think most Americans are paying attention to Democrat attack tactics? No, they can see the difference in their paycheck. They can see the difference in their wallet. When you only save $1.50 in your from your taxes, but then you look and you see these people, that are ultra wealthy, saving over $60,000 a year, buying an extra yacht, you tend to realize that, wait a minute, I thought those tax cuts were supposed to help me. Turns out they're not helping me. I got an extra $1.50. What am I supposed to do with that? Get a candy bar? Wow. Gee, thanks, Paul Ryan. You've really saved me a whole lot of money there. They know when they're getting screwed. They know when things are unfair, even if they don't know the details. So, and of course, like I said, they are worried. They are worried that these tax cuts are going to lead to cutting of benefits in so-called entitlement programs, which are actually earned benefit programs, like Social Security and Medicaid. Medicare and Medicaid. In fact, one of the recent budgets that President Trump had put out had $800 billion in cuts to Medicaid. Billions of dollars in cuts to Social Security and Medicare. So you can't say that they don't want to do that. They have told you, they have telegraphed that they absolutely will do it. In fact, you have prominent Republicans in the administration like Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan's wet dream since college was to cut your Social Security and Medicare. Larry Kudlow, he was talking about cutting Social Security and Medicare to pay for the tax cuts just recently. In fact, when he was speaking at the Economic Club of New York, he's in the club, and of course, we're not in the club. He had this exchange with CNBC's Becky Quick. She asked, will the Trump administration tackle entitlement reform? He said, well, we've already tackled a big part of the newest entitlement, namely Obamacare. So the reason, of course, that your insurance is going up is because the Republicans mess with the ACA to make sure you end up paying more. Congratulations. Then he also says, as for the larger entitlements, I think everyone's going to look at that probably next year. I don't want to be specific. I don't want to get ahead of our own budgeting, but we'll get there. And as CNBC previously reported as well, Kudlow added the White House is determined to reduce federal spending, and part of the Republican plan is to curb spending, is tackling entitlements. Not reducing the Pentagon budget. In fact, they just passed an even larger Pentagon budget, where basically all the Democrats and most of the Republicans passed this gigantic increase. I think it was, Rand Paul was one of the Rand Paul, which is one of the ones that didn't vote for it. And of course, Bernie Sanders also didn't vote for this increase. So Americans, of course, that are worried about this are absolutely correct to worry. They do want to rob your Social Security. They do want to rob your Medicare to pay for these tax cuts. And so now, nonetheless, Republicans, even though they're worried about this, they're still trying to conduct one last heist. In fact, they're planning to hold a floor vote next week for tax cuts 2.0. So this would not only make the normal rates that were in the first round of tax cuts permanent, but also lower tax cuts or lower taxes for the rich even more. So they know that they need to do something quick because look, they want to do one last robbery before we hit them with the blue wave, because it ain't looking good for the Republicans in November. They know these tax cuts are deeply, deeply unpopular because they know it mostly benefited their donors. That was the whole point of the tax cuts. They knew that from the beginning, and they tried to sell the American people on a bullshit lie. And guess what? The American people were not falling for it. They caught on to the scam immediately. And so Republicans are like, let's go, let's hurry up, let's pass this so that we can steal the money for these and give it to our donors before we get our asses kicked. Okay. I think we're clear on that one. All right. So let's go to a sad story. Authorities are investigating the drowning deaths of two mentally ill women that were in their custody. Now, the women, Nicolette Green and Wendy Newton, suffer from mental illness, and they had voluntarily committed themselves for mental health treatment. Now, this was happening in North Carolina during the hurricane. Now, the two women were being transported to a mental health facility from a hospital when the sheriff's van that they were traveling in was overtaken by floodwaters. Now, the two sheriff's deputies in the van managed to get out, and they were hiding on the roof for safety, said Sheriff Philip E. Thompson of Horry County. But the women, unfortunately, did not. Now, by the time emergency workers arrived by boat and found the deputies on the van's roof, it was too dark to dive. The van, with Ms. Green and Ms. Newton inside, remained in the waters by Highway 76 overnight, and their bodies were recovered Wednesday evening. Now, the families, of course, are questioning, now, wait a minute. This wasn't supposed to happen. You were supposed to take them in for treatment. How could this happen? What were you even doing near floodwaters? That's not where you were supposed to be going. In fact, Allison Newton, Wendy Newton's daughter, asked, why the hell would they leave a safe, dry area to go to God knows what? Something feels wrong about this. And as we go through the details here, I'm pretty sure you're also going to get that feeling. Officials on Wednesday said the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division and the Sheriff's Department were conducting investigations into what happened. Those two deputies, Josh Bishop, who had been in the force for 6 years, and Stephen Flood, ironic, who had been in the force for 10, have been put on administrative leave while they look into this. Now, Sheriff Thompson said they did get out and try to get the ladies out, but he's not sure how long they tried. Possibly about 45 minutes. He also says that they may have struggled because of the way that the van was positioned against the guardrail or because of the pressure of the water on the doors. So it's possible that they just might not have been able to get them out because of those couple of factors. But the real question is, why were they even there in the first place? They were not being evacuated from the floodwaters. No. They started out in an area that was not impacted by floodwaters, and they were heading to an area that was also not impacted by floodwaters. But yet, for some reason, the deputies in the van drove into the floodwaters. What were they trying to take a shortcut? What's going on here? What were they doing? Well, as I said before, they were both being taken from hospitals where they had been committed voluntarily to mental health facilities. Nowhere should they should have been nowhere near those floodwaters. And yet, for some reason, they were. Now, at the news conference, Sheriff Thompson said that his department had been responding to a court order to transport the women. However, the family members said, what court order? There was never a court order, at least not that we knew about. And normally, this has happened before. We've had them go to hospitals. We've had them go to mental hospitals. When this has happened, and we've never had any problem. We were always well informed. We always knew where our family members were. But in this case, we had no idea where they were. They didn't tell us anything. In fact, we found out that our family members were dead from the news reports. Wow. Now, apparently, it is apparently routine and required under state law for law enforcement to transport people who are involuntarily committed and who are determined by a physician as posing an imminent risk of harm to him or herself by virtue of mental illness, according to a statement from the State Department of Mental Health. It was unclear to the families whether the women had expressed an intent to harm themselves or anyone else. So it's very good chance that they shouldn't have even been in the sheriff's custody to begin with, because there is no evidence that they were being dangerous. Again, they were both voluntarily committed. They both said, oh my God, you're right. I may have an episode, so I'm just going to go to the hospital. I'm just going to go to be safe so that, everybody else around me is safe, and so that I'm safe, and so that nothing happens. So I'm going to turn myself in here and get my treatment. Now, one was, of course, schizophrenic. She was taking her medication, and I think there's going to be something. I think I may have an episode later, so I'm just going to go and get treatment myself. Okay, sure. And that makes a lot of sense. Now, the sheriff did not think the women were in restraints when they drowned. So earlier reports came in, and this is when the family had found out about us, is from news reports that said that they were literally shackled in restraints inside of the van when they were drowned. Now, he said, the sheriff did, restraining patients was not typical if they're not combative or having issues, and I understand that they were not. So then what about those earlier news reports then? Why were they shackled according to those reports? Now, maybe the reports were wrong. Or maybe they were handcuffed anyway. I don't know. And neither does the sheriff. He could not say for sure. Well, how could you not know? You're the sheriff. You should know whether or not that they were restrained because, again, you had the officers there, the deputies there, who could tell you, no, there's something that stinks about this, right? In fact, not only that, but here's the thing. The deputies also apparently drove onto a road that was blocked off because of flooding. The sheriff could not account for why they would have done that. So many unanswered questions here. Why were these women who were apparently not combative, apparently not dangerous to themselves or others, shackled inside of a sheriff's van? And why did that van decide to go to a blocked off road that was flooded over? What? So many questions. And the family of Allison Newman, the other woman who was unfortunately drowned, is also asking questions, since, again, they were not told much information and had to rely on news reports for the details. And, of course, the details are that these two women may have died in handcuffs. Allison asked, why would they chain her and another lady to the back of a truck? Why didn't they just tell us that she was being transported? Why were they going through the floodwaters knowing how dangerous it's been? That's my mother you're talking about. I couldn't imagine. Look, this story is disastrous in about a million different ways. I mean, could you imagine if they were restrained, despite not being violent, despite not being a danger to themselves or others, that the reason that they drowned is because they were restrained inside of the back of the truck and couldn't get out? I mean, could you imagine being shackled or handcuffed to a wall, right? And seeing the floodwaters rise and not being able to do anything? That's just about the worst thing that you could imagine. Absolutely terrifying. And so there's a lot of questions that need to get answered. People need to be held accountable for this. And the families, I mean, look, the families, there's nothing we can do to bring those women back. But these families deserve answers, and they deserve justice for what happened. Okay. So let's go from disastrous to somewhat lighter for the last story. Okay. Actually, we'll take a quick break here before we do that. And then I'll read some super chats. Then we'll do the story. All right? So we'll be right back. Around the Nation. All right, welcome back to the show. One last story here for you guys, but first, we have a super chat. Platypi says, I cried when my friend told me she earns about €3 a day. This world is unbelievably fucked. I just printed an application form to run for my local seat. Awesome. See, that's what we want to see, though. Putting political action, doing political action, and running for office, that is about the best way that you can make real change. So, hats off, man. Now, €3 is about $3.50. So, that's $3.50 a day. That is disastrous. And yet, all the money seems to go to the rich. And these corporations and these CEOs always complain that, oh, we just don't have the money. We just don't have enough money to pay our workers. Bullshit. If your CEO is making millions and millions of dollars a year, then you got money. Take a pay cut. Oh, I know. They'll never want to do that. Of course not. But they should. Okay, anyway. Guy Tony tweets in, or I'm sorry, sends a super chat that says, actually, pronunciation is more Beto. Okay, yeah, Beto. I have a problem with pronunciation sometimes. Like, I just don't know how to say certain things. So thank you for that correction, Guy Tony. Okay, anyway. Hopefully I'll get it right now. Not Beto, Beto. Gotcha. Words are hard, but I have the best words. The greatest words. Tremendous words. Okay. Anyway. Last story of the day. Now, President Trump loves to refer to himself as a very stable genius. Now, apparently that declaration seems to be taking off in Trump world, as a man who was standing behind the president during a recent rally was seen sporting a shirt that said just that. In fact, I want to show you that image here. Oh, look at that. Very stable genius. Very stable. You know what? I actually like mine better. If you see that. Very stable genius. But anyway. Now, CNBC White House reporter Christina Wilkie had shared an image of the man on Twitter, pointing out that it was, quote, unclear whether the man was wearing this shirt ironically. And the only question is because it's such a ridiculous statement. Oh, no, very stable genius. I mean, who refers to themselves as a very stable genius? Well, we have somebody. It's the President of the United States. Insanity. But anyway, now, she did point out that he was applauding and waving a Make America Great Again sign. Although, of course, he could be doing that to get a little conspiratorial. That he was doing this to avoid getting kicked out like Plaid Shirt Guy. Plaid Shirt Guy, of course, American hero. Now, it's also possible, but look, not very likely. He's not wearing it ironically and totally believes that Trump is a very stable genius. In fact, that's what Donald Trump calls himself all the time. Let me give you the quote here, which is great. Now that Russian collusion after 1 year of intense study has proven to be a total hoax on the American public, the Democrats and their lapdogs, the fake news mainstream media, are taking out the old Ronald Reagan playbook and screaming mental stability and intelligence. Okay. Now, okay, Ronald Reagan, by the way, he had Alzheimer's at the end of his life. And did show, at least according to some people, a little bit of mental decline in office. But then again, that could have been aged. Ronald Reagan was like ancient. But anyway, it's not quite the same thing as Trump, as he is definitely not a genius, as we've seen, and definitely not stable. In fact, who says things like this? Actually, throughout my life, my two greatest assets have been mental stability and being, like, really smart. That's a genuine quote. Here's another one. Hurricane Florence is, quote, one of the wettest we've ever seen from the standpoint of water. I'm just saying. Water is wet. Who could have known? Oh, the big water. The ocean water. Okay? Big water. Or, of course, I got this gem, where Donald Trump starts talking about nuclear.
Look, having nuclear, my uncle was a great professor and scientist and engineer, Dr. John Trump at MIT. Good genes, very good genes, okay? Very smart. The Wharton School of Finance, very good, very smart. You know, if you're a conservative Republican, if I were a liberal, if I ran as a liberal Democrat, they would say I'm one of the smartest people anywhere in the world. It's true. But when you're a conservative Republican, they try, oh, do they do a number? That's why I always thought of, went to Wharton, was a good student, went there, did this, built the, you know, I have to give my like credentials all the time because we're at a little disadvantage. But you look at the nuclear deal, the thing that really bothers me, it would have been so easy, and it's not as important as these lives are. Nuclear is so powerful. My uncle explained that to me many, many years ago, the power, and that was 35 years ago. He would explain the power of what's going to happen, and he was right. Who would have thought? But when you look at what's going on with the 4 prisoners, now it used to be 3, now it's 4. But when it was 3, and even now, I would have said it's all in the messenger. Fellas, and it is fellas because, you know, they haven't figured that the women are smarter right now than the men, so, you know, it's going to take them about another 150 years. But the Persians are great negotiators. The Iranians are great negotiators. So, and they just killed us. This is horrible.
What? In that, there was about 4 or 5 different competing thoughts all taking over Donald Trump's brain space as he was talking. What? He did? Huh? Oh, no. Many, many years ago, my uncle explained that the power of nuclear. Nuclear is powerful. He said that 35 years ago, and he was right. You know, we already had nuclear weapons 35 years ago. We've had them longer for 35 years. No, he's going to explain what happened. He was right. And then, yeah. And then the Persians. They're great negotiators. Yep. The Iranians, great negotiators. Yeah. Awesome. What? Oh no, he you don't understand. He's a very stable genius, and he has the best words, the greatest words. God help us all. That's it. That's all I got for you guys today. Kind of leave off on a ridiculous, funny note. But anyway, thanks everybody. Thank you for going around the nation with me today. Appreciate it. We'll be back. We'll have a great show on Monday. And then we'll have a Get Vocal on Monday as well. We're going to have a guest, Ron Placone, is going to join us. We're going to debate whether Russians or other foreign actors are coming for our elections, our midterms. So check that out. That is 5 p.m. Eastern here. You can watch it on TYT Nation. This is our channel. But okay. That's it. Have a great weekend, guys. We'll see you back here on Monday. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, guys. We'll see you on Monday.